I am happy. I mean, one, obviously, I'm back and making videos again, and that's a good thing. But I'm also happy because, well, Sunderland. Sunderland actually managed to get promoted. And I'm not just happy because way back in the mists of time, a young little Zealandism was hanging out in fourth grade class, and all of the other cool kids were picking out, what their favorite Premier League team was going to be because it was coming on NBC and it was this big deal and they were advertising it all over the place. And my dumbass picked Sunderland. Now, I have never been a card-carrying Sunderland fan. I don't watch all the games. I don't know all of the players. But ever since I made that fatefully stupid decision, I have always hoped that they did well. And when I caught news, like, a carrier pigeon going by my window, carrying some sort of banner, that they were doing well, I was always excited. I was always excited to hear it. And now, miraculously, and I do mean miraculously, Sunderland has shithoused its way into the Premier League. And obviously I'm happy for them because of those life choices I made, but I said that's not the only reason, and I'm right. Because this was an interesting game. This was a game that to me validates the point of the playoffs and allows me to appreciate why the playoffs are so special. I obviously live in a world where playoffs happen all the time. As I'm currently actively recording this, there are playoff games happening right now. In playoffs, they create the opportunity for magic. Okay, they create the opportunity for the team that's not supposed to win a game. And that is exactly what happened here. Exactly. Anybody that watched the game unbiasedly, anybody that's ever covered the game, anybody that has a channel like me where they just talk about random shit in the game, could watch this game and tell you Sheffield United was better. They were better damn near start to finish. They probably should have had at least 3 goals in this game. Who gives a shit? I love the playoffs. Because if you really want to get up to the Premier League, there are 2 automatic spots that are calling your name. And you know what? Sheffield United, even though they gave those 2 teams a serious run for their money, they didn't get there. They were unable to actually close that gap. And so they ended up being the best team in the playoff. They beat whoever it was, Bristol, that they played in the semifinal. They beat them 6-0 on aggregate, while Sunderland manages to scrap through Coventry, pulling out all the stops, like, bringing the sideboards in so Coventry couldn't do their long throws. All sorts of insane nonsense. Just trying to use every bit of black magic the Black Cats could possibly summon to get themselves into a position where they'd be able to go to the Prem, because that's all you need. It's 3 matches. And in particularly 1 match of soccer, 1 match of football, anything can happen. It is the beauty of the game. There aren't a lot of goals. In basketball, you score 100 points. Right? There's more opportunities for good scorers to affect the game and so on and so forth. And your average game of soccer or football, you're going to get 2, 3 goals, right? 2, 3 moments that are going to decide everything. And the first moment was Sheffield United making Sunderland look pedestrian. This first goal by Tyrese Campbell was gorgeous. It wasn't him. It was Hammer. I know I'm not saying it right, but you know who I'm talking about, who set it up. A beautiful, majestic run. It was gorgeous. The announcer at the time said that's a goal that belongs in the Premier League, and that's because it looked for all the world like Sheffield United was going to be the team walking out of Wembley with the trophy. The finish was sumptuous, delectable, delicious. And then they scored again in the 34th minute, and it was judged offside by VAR, which, by the way, doesn't exist in the championship. It only exists in the playoff, which I think that's a good thing. But this goal would have stood if they were playing in the regular season. It did not stand because they were in Wembley with VAR and semi-automated offside, and they found that somebody was offside in the line of sight of the goalkeeper, and they disallowed the goal. There was then an instance in the second half, I believe somewhere right around here, where the Sunderland defense makes an absolutely, utterly horrific mistake. Lets a guy go clean in on goal. And it's just a miraculous kind of shoestring save to keep the ball out of the back of the net. All of this to just keep it 1-0. This isn't even mentioning the fact that in the first minute, Sheffield United and Kiefer Moore, who's the kind of quintessential good championship forward, had a header going right into the bottom corner, and then somehow again, this goalkeeper, Patterson, just fished it out of the corner before it went in. It was a stupidly good save. It was a sensational save. Sheffield United should have buried this game long before we got to a point where Sunderland was able to find a way to survive. That's going to haunt them for a very long time. Because Sunderland's first decent move of the entire game ends up with a beautifully taken finish by Mayenda, and it's 1-1. This is why you got to step on the throat. This is why you have to put teams away. It's one game for, as everybody talks about, like $200 million. It's one game for everything. The difference between the championship and the Premier League in terms of global relevance, in terms of finances, in terms of player acquisition, in terms of facilities, in terms of staff, it's everything. And the gap gets bigger every year, meaning every time this game is played, the gap is larger. The jump that these teams that win this will have to take in order to compete next year gets larger. But the jump in terms of the impact it has on the club is larger still. And then, of course, as a lot of people probably already saw, this kid, Watson, who grew up down the road from Sunderland and was kind of getting booed because he announced he was moving to Brighton in the offseason, he scores a spectacular goal. And you know who made the mistake? Kiefer Moore. The one guy who you just wouldn't expect to be the guy making the mistake in this situation. It was a piece of hold-up play, and he made an abysmal pass to lay it off to his teammate. I don't know what happened. I don't know what he was expecting. It was terrible, and it put Watson in, and he tucked it into the bottom corner from 24 yards like he wasn't 19 years old, like he'd been there before. Scoring that goal as a teenager, I'd probably retire immediately. I mean, it was a special goal. It was a special goal in a special time and in a special team. Not just because I'm a fan of them, but a special team because we now have a situation that I don't believe necessarily we've had, kind of in recent years. We, have a team that is not going right back into the Prem after a few years or whatever. We don't have a team that has methodically built itself up to this point. That's not what Sunderland is. If you look at who they or where they've been, they finished 16th last year. This was not a team that entered the season with a realistic hope. I mean, they had hope. Everybody in the championship has hope, except for Plymouth Argyle, right? Because they were always bound to be relegated eventually. But Sunderland didn't have real hope, tangible hope after a 16th place finish in the championship. Knowing how it had gone for them recently with 4 years in League One, they were probably hoping they just weren't going to get relegated again. That was probably a realistic expectation. They bring in a new manager, team battles its butt off, but even still, this was not a team that even entered the playoff where people were looking at them and going, look at those boys go. They lost 5 straight games going into the playoff. 5 straight. They didn't nearly bottle it. They were in kind of a safe position, but losing 5 straight games, they hadn't won a game before the playoffs since April 5th. It was over a month until they beat Coventry in the first leg of the playoff. 5 losses and a draw. It makes no sense. It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense. This team doesn't belong in the Premier League. Everything is telling you that Sunderland shouldn't be here, but they are. And they are going to be a part of the Premier League, even though they weren't methodically built to be able to handle it. And they aren't getting parachute payments. And they just spent 4 years in League One. And we all know what that means. We all know that they're probably going to end up going down. If they don't, it's going to be really impressive. Complete overhaul of the squad, facilities, everything that they understand. And, slap it all together and see if, the pieces start humming and it clicks and it's able to work. But it almost doesn't matter. Because even if Sunderland does go right back down, they're a Premier League team again. They're in the same category as Sheffield United, these types of teams that have been around the Premier League recently, that can attract that type of player, that can dream big, that can believe they can turn into a Crystal Palace and start pumping out mid-table finishes. Right? They have that as a realistic aspiration now, and any potential financial discomfort they had been feeling has immediately been alleviated. It's gone. Because you're going into the Premier League. My first thought was, I'm really happy for Sunderland. My second thought was, I love the idea of the playoff. because you just need to shithouse a couple of games, and that's exactly what Sunderland's managed to do. And they gave a starving, famished, parched fan base something to be happy about. One of the great sleeping giant fan bases that seems to exist in England that has had to watch their hated rival Newcastle rise to unimaginable oil-fueled heights, right, and win their first trophy in however long. Well, guess what? Sunderland's on the same dance floor again. And my final thought was, they're probably going to get relegated, but who cares? I don't. Sheffield United would have been a better Premier League team than Sunderland, but they didn't win this game. And that's magic. And I love the fact that every Sunderland fan, every maybe Sunderland player, they all knew they weren't quite as good as Sheffield United, and it didn't matter. The magic of football is when the team that's not as good on paper, results-wise, technically, when they win. And the playoff, even though it's just a small dose of that American system, gives us that magic. And I was so happy that I was able to come back after a few days home for Memorial Day, right? To celebrate the magic of the playoff. And you know this isn't the only video I'm making about playoff stuff, so don't get your panties in a twist now. We've got more videos coming. I'm locked in.